Hello friends, welcome to my channel Clinical Biochemistry by Dr. P. K. Prabhakar. Today we are going to talk about glycogen storage disease type 1. This glycogen storage disease type 1, this is also known as von Gierke disease, and this is the normal metabolic process of glycogen. Here we can see glycogen is first going to be metabolized, so glucose is going to be removed from the glycogen by the enzyme glycogen phosphorylase, and it releases glucose in the form of glucose 1 phosphate. This glucose 1 phosphate is converted to glucose 6 phosphate by phosphoglucomutase. Then this glucose 6 phosphate is going to be removed by a hepatic enzyme that is called as glucose 6 phosphatase. This enzyme removes the phosphate and glucose 6 phosphate is converted to glucose. So here we are going to get glucose, and this glucose will be utilized for different purposes in the body, for especially for the energy productions and other purposes. If this glucose 6 phosphate may be diverted to some other pathway for some other metabolic processes also, but normally the genes responsible for this glucose 6 phosphatase enzymes, which is going to be convert glucose 6 phosphate to glucose, that is present on the chromosome number 17. Whenever we are having, in case of glycogen storage disease type 1 or von Gierke disease, this gene is defective, so we are not having, or the person is not having, this glucose 6 phosphatase enzyme present in their body. So if this enzyme is not present in their body, so they are unable to convert glucose 6 phosphate to glucose. So this is the normal way glycogen is converted to glucose, but by the enzyme glucose 6 phosphatase. So this enzyme is defective in this case. Whenever this enzyme is defective, so ultimately glycogen level is going to rise in the person's body, or glucose level is going down, because we are not able to convert glycogen to glucose. So ultimately glucose 6 phosphate rises, and this ultimately leads to different kind of abnormality. Some of these abnormality are like low blood sugar, that is hypoglycemia, lactic acidosis. We will see how these all complications is going to happen. Hyperlipidemia, gouty arthritis, weakness, and poor growth of body will be there. So this is normally we are having glucose. So glucose is the one of the important energy source of our body, which is normally stored in the liver cells and skeletal muscle cells. So mainly in the form of glycogen they are going to be stored. Glycogen, which is going to be converted from this glucose, is a polymeric, homopolymeric polysaccharides from the glucose, and this glycogen is a very compact structures, and rapidly it is going to be metabolized whenever body requires glucose. So in this glycogen we are having a glycosidic bonds, either alpha 1,4, so this is alpha 1,4 glycosidic bonds, or at the branching point we are having 1,6 branching point, and they will have multiple branching. So whenever we are requiring the glucose, so this glycogen is going to be metabolized, means this 1,4 bond and 1,6 bond will be broken down, and ultimately we are going to get glucose. So whenever we eat the food, our food, so as in response to this food, pancreatic beta cells are going to release insulin. This insulin normally make a signal that glucose need to be converted into glycogen. So glucose will be stored in the form of glycogen, and ultimately because of food, glucose level rises. So after the conversion of glucose to glycogen, glucose level coming down. But reverse process is going to happen when we are going to have fasting. So at the time of fasting, because we don't have food, so body sugar level going down, so that time there is a signal comes from in the pancreas as well as in the adrenal glands. Pancreas is going to release glucagon, so glucagon is going to convert glycogen into glucose. Similarly, if adrenal gland is going to release epinephrine in the muscles, and they works on the muscles, they in liver also, in the muscle also, they are going to convert glycogen into glucose, and ultimately glucose level is going to rise. This is the normal process in case of fasting. So at the time of fasting we require glycogen need to be converted into glucose. So this glycogens normally converted, and ultimately we have seen the pathway, glycogen is converted to glucose 6 phosphate. This glucose 6 phosphate in the liver, because in the hepatocytes we are having glucose 6 phosphatase enzyme. So because of this glucose 6 phosphatase enzymes, glucose 6 phosphate is going to be converted to glucose, and it will be going into the blood circulation, and almost all other tissue will be using the glucose. So whatever glucose is going to be produced in the liver, that will be available for all other body tissue also. But in the skeletal muscles, as in skeletal muscle we don't have glucose 6 phosphatase, so here we are not able to convert into glucose 6 phosphate to glucose. So here we are having only glucose 6 phosphate, and that will be used for energy. So this glucose 6 phosphate cannot comes out of the skeletal muscles, and this glucose 6 phosphate will not be shared with the other tissue. So skeletal muscles, when they are going to metabolize glycogens, it will be only for those specific tissue only, they are going to use by themselves. But when glycogen is going to be metabolized in the liver, it will be used by all other body tissue. Now how they are going to cause different type of complications. In case of glycogen storage disease type 1, because we are having glucose 6 phosphatase deficiency, so we are not able to convert glucose 6 phosphate to glucose. So phosphate is not going to be removed, so glucose conversion will not be there. And if glucose conversion is not there, so they are not going to leave the liver also. So what is going to happen? This glucose 6 phosphate is going to participate in the normal glycolytic processes. So they will be converted into pyruvic acid, or they will be converted into acetyl coenzyme A. When this glucose 6 phosphate is going to participate in pyruvic acid, converted to pyruvic acid, this pyruvic acid converts into the lactic acid, so body will have high amount of lactic acids, and the rise in the lactic acid ultimately going to decrease the body blood pH and leads to lactic acidosis. So body pH decreases towards the acidic region and leads to lactic acidosis. This is the reason how lactic acidosis is going to happen. Similarly, when this acetyl coenzyme A conversion increases because of this glucose 6 phosphate, so this acetyl coenzyme A will be used for triglyceride synthesis. So more triglyceride synthesis, so ultimately it leads to hypertriglyceridemia and ultimately leads to hyperlipidemia also. At the same time, because we are not able to convert glucose 6 phosphate to glucose, so body will not have sufficient amount of glucose conversion, so body will have hypoglycemic conditions and hypoglycemia will be there. And another thing is glucose 6 phosphate is the source substrate for the pentose phosphate pathway also. So this glucose 6 phosphate which enters into the pentose phosphate pathway converted to ribose 5 phosphate, that is the 5 carbon pentose sugar, and this is the precursor for uric acid precursor, especially purines. So because of this rise in glucose 6 phosphate in the body, we are having more uric acid production, and more uric acid productions ultimately going to be deposited between the joints and ultimately going to cause hyperuricemia and the gouty arthritis. So these are the reasons why we are having lactic acidosis in case of von Gierke disease, why we are having hyperlipidemia in case of von Gierke disease, why we are having gouty arthritis in case of von Gierke disease, and why we are having hypoglycemic conditions in case of von Gierke disease. There are different symptoms, as we know that most of the inborn neurometabolic processes disease are autosomal recessive. So we require one allele from both the parents. So if only one allele comes from only one parents, kids will be the carrier, they will not have any kind of disease because it is a recessive disease. Symptoms are normally, its symptoms occurs in 3 to 6 months of the age, early age, and it is going to cause different type of abnormal neurological abnormalities will be there, like seizures, lethargy, weakness will be there. These are because of hypoglycemia regions, because brain normally uses glucose and glucose will not be there. Because I have told you we require more glucose for the energy and the developmental also, because we don't have so much of glucose, so growth is also not going to happen and developmental delay will be there, and all glucose 6 phosphate is going to be stored into the liver. So normally we are having liver size is going to increase and it is going to cause hepatomegaly. Now how it will be diagnosed, because it is a genetic defect, so it can be detected by the DNA testing. So we can see mutations, we can find mutation on the chromosome number 17 in the glucose 6 phosphatase gene. The treatments, because it is a complicated disorder, so it normally involves a team of physicians, dietary practitioners and endocrine practitioners. It normally we provide them metabolic products, rearrangements. So we have, because it is going to lead to hypoglycemic condition, so we have to give diet of complex carbohydrates, normally which lacks fructose and galactose should be given to the person. Severe hypoglycemia will be caused. So in that case, if it is very severe hypoglycemic condition, then we have to in vitro dextrose will be given through IV, which corrects normally low blood sugar and co-presenting lactic acidosis also. If this lactic acidosis is going to occur, then we have to supply them bicarbonate. So this bicarbonate which is alkaline in nature, so that will remove this alkalosis. And for the hyperlipidemic conditions, we have to give some statins or fibrates which correct the lipid imbalances. So these are the various various complications, signs and symptoms regarding to glycogen storage disease type 1 or von Gierke disease. So this is all about today for today's lecture. Hope you have understood it. Thank you very much. If you have any question, any comments, you can write in the comment box. If you are not subscribed my channel, please subscribe it. Thank you very much.